Hi. This video is to explain the cell membrane and kind of lead us into how we were talking about cell transport, how things get in and out of the cell. So we think of the cell membrane as kind of like the gatekeeper of the cell. It not only gives the cell shape, but it also kind of holds contents in and it decides what's going to go in and out of the cell. It's composed of a phospholipid bilayer, so we're going to discuss that. It's given the descriptive title, I guess, of being called a fluid mosaic model. Talk about why. So first of all, let's quick talk about the phospholipid bilayer. The name tells us everything we need to know about this, really. Phospho refers to this phosphate head. There's a phosphate in this, there's actually a chemical molecule in here, but we just use this circle to represent that molecule. It's much more pleasing for a visual of what phosphate or phospholipid would look like. So phospho for this phosphate head, and then lipid for the fatty acid tail. There's two of them. Remember fatty acids, we talked about this with macromolecules, that is a lipid, that's a fat. And then bilayer means two, bi meaning two, and layer. So two layers of these phospholipids. And because of the molecular structure of these parts of the phospholipid, the head is going to be polar. So anything that is polar, having a little bit of a charge, is going to be attracted to water. Hydrophilic means water-loving. So it's going to have that magnetic, almost like attraction because of those charges. With the polar head to water, because water, remember, has a little bit of charge. We learned that in biochemistry that those molecules, water molecules, will kind of stick together, and it has to do with that little bit of a charge kind of at each end of the molecule. Now, fatty acids are the opposite. They don't have any little bit of a charge sticking out anywhere. They're very non-polar. They have no charge, and therefore they are hydrophobic. They don't like water. So what ends up happening is these molecules, these polar heads, tend to face out towards the water, and then the fatty acids want to move away from the water. So what happens naturally is they line themselves up in a double layer, just like this. And this happens naturally. Like there's an experiment you can do where you mix like egg yolks and oil, and then you put it in water, and they form what are called micelles, which is just basically a circle of this membrane stuff, because all the tails will pull in together to kind of create this almost like safe place, I guess you could say, for them away from the water. And then those hydrophilic heads point outward and inward. Remember that the inside of a cell is a watery environment also. So those heads stick out. So this is just kind of naturally how they would form themselves anyway. All right, and then we just broke down the vocab pieces. Hydro meaning water. Phobic is a fear of. We should have these in your notes already. Philic is a love of or liking. Polar has a little bit of a charge. Nonpolar does not. So we name the parts of this cell membrane by saying it has hydrophilic heads. That phosphate group is polar, therefore it's hydrophilic. Those tails are nonpolar, therefore they are hydrophobic, made out of that fatty acid. So nonpolar, hydrophobic. These two videos I'm going to also post separately as animations to look at on the website. So look for those if you would like to see an animation of the cell membrane. And then the reason we actually call it a fluid mosaic model is because, if you know, the cell membrane is very fluid. It actually moves. And one of the videos, one of the animations shows how that happens. But it is and these molecules that are all stuck in it, they can move around. This one could move easily through these phospholipid bilayer and end up over here. And then it also moves like it's flexible. It can bend. And because then, that's where it gets its fluid part of that title. Now the mosaic part, if you know anything about mosaic art, it's taking chunks of things and putting them together and recreating them into a new image. And we're taking the idea that there's kind of just chunks of things all embedded in the cell membrane to give it that mosaic look. So it's mosaic because it's got stuff kind of wedged in all over the place. And then it's also fluid because it's movable and flexible. So we call it a fluid mosaic model. Some of these proteins in this cell membrane, they do lots of jobs. I need to quick check. I'm not on time. Okay, we're good. Here's some of the things that these proteins will do. Remember, we always say that proteins are the workhorses of the cell. They do everything. Proteins are made directly from instructions on our DNA, and then they kind of go out and make sure that all of those instructions are carried out somehow. They're also used, they're embedded in the cell membrane for transporting things across the cell membrane. They're embedded in the cell membrane and all over in the cell as enzymes to speed up chemical reactions. They're also for signaling. Proteins do a lot of communication in our bodies and in our cells. So proteins are embedded in the cell membrane for signaling, maybe signaling from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell that, oh no, we're being invaded by viruses, there's trouble, and then the rest of the cells will respond. Maybe it's cell-to-cell recognition. If you look here, some of these flag-like projections are carbohydrates. And a lot of times they're just marking the cell. They're saying, well, I'm a stomach cell, or this one is saying I'm Miss Camrood's cell. And that would be because our bodies are constantly monitoring for invaders. So the cells that do belong to us have to be marked. So there's cell-to-cell recognition. And sometimes cells have to attach to each other or to another surface to stay in place. So that's some of the reasons that these proteins are all stuck in all over the place. These cholesterol molecules specifically, though, they're responsible for keeping our cell membranes fluid. They lower the freezing point, basically, of the cell membrane. So even when our body temperature drops, the cell membrane can still handle it quite a bit. Otherwise, we'd have really big problems if our cell membrane started to solidify, like if you put butter, you can melt it when it's warm, but you put it back in the refrigerator and it starts to harden again. Well, you can imagine if this cell membrane starts to harden again, then oxygen molecules can't cross the cell membrane, carbon dioxide molecules can't cross the cell membrane, and we start to have some really big problems. Water can't move in and out, so it would be a problem. So those cholesterol molecules help keep our cell membranes fluid and mobile. And then there are two major classes of those proteins, the ones that go all the way through the cell membrane and the ones that are just kind of stuck on the side. And so in class we talked about how integral proteins are transmembrane proteins. They go all the way across the protein. Where peripheral proteins, you think about peripheral vision, and you hold your hands out to the side and bring them, focusing forward, bring your hands from each side and stop when you can see them. That's your peripheral vision. Well, now where your hands are, there's just kind of one on each side of your body. And that's kind of where we get the idea of peripheral proteins. So like this one is just embedded on one side. This one's just embedded on one side. So that's where it gets peripheral from. So there's peripheral proteins also. And then that takes us into transporting. And then I've got another video that talks about all the different forms of transport, from passive transport to active transport, and the different types specifically that you're going to need to know. I will also post some animations for these transport and for the cell membrane.